How's everybody else doing? Feel free to unmute yourself and say hi if you like.
Doing well. My name is Linda.
Hi, Linda. Is this your first time with us?
It is.
Welcome, welcome. Good
Thank
time to
you.
be starting with chapter 4 about to begin.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Sonia, and although I tried many times, this is the first time I'm here.
Oh, good. Well, I mean, it's not good that you couldn't make it on before, but I'm glad you're joining us too. It's cool to have some new folks.
Hi, I'm Paula. And I've been here a few times. I live on Maui. So, hello.
Yeah, feel free to, if you're not comfortable talking, feel free to pop something into chat saying where you're from. And we're pretty casual at this thing. This is not so much a formal class format as me either doing stuff that works or making a fool of myself on camera, depending on the day. So hopefully it's a little more of the former than the latter. If you are new, I'd also love to hear what your background is, what are you already doing a lot of metalsmithing? Are there specific stone settings you're looking forward to? It is indeed slightly overcast in Oregon today too, and not just Southern Oregon. I've got the usual, in Portland, we get the sun glaring through really cloudy weather, which is super strange. I'm responding to people on chat as well as those of you that talk up. So if you haven't popped up the chat window, you'll see occasional exchanges there. We're going to give folks a couple minutes and then we will dive right in because there is a chaotic amount of stuff for me to catch up on. So we're going to be doing a little bit of a bunch of different things today. And maybe while we wait up for those folks that are new, I'll reiterate some of my basics, which is that you are welcome to play along at home or not as you see fit. You can just watch if you prefer. All the videos go up within a week or two, depending on my other work schedule. So they're up on YouTube if you want to catch up. And then I also want to remind people that I am not John Cogswell. I'm just a student of his who is enjoying the process of working all the way through his book from start to finish. We have for chapter 3, which is the longest chapter in the book, we've finished all the crafting of the settings, and now we're in the setting phase. Based on people's poll results on the Facebook group, I'm going to switch over to trying to intersperse doing some setting with doing some creation, some making, and then some setting, some making, and then some setting. This time we're going to do some setting and then some tool making, so that I won't do crafting a new setting this time, but we will start on chapter 4 settings next session for sure, even though we won't have fully finished setting all of the chapter 3 settings. Not new to metalsmithing, good. And you have the Cogswell book, that's good. I'm a fan. If you enjoy this and you don't have a Cogswell book, I can tell you it's very much worth getting. I personally recommend the hardcover. It'll be easier to follow along, simply because the pagination in the online version is off and there's some pictures that are out of place and stuff. And I often refer to the page in the book that I'm on when there's a particularly challenging drawing or stretch of directions that he's given us, and we're trying to get some clarity on it. In general, we start out by this kind of an intro, then we go straight into the working session. At the end, I leave 15 minutes or so or more if we have a good break point for people to show and tell whatever projects they're working on. Doesn't have to be what we're working on that day. It can be something that you've been focusing on in your own stone setting or what have you. And it can also be Q&A if there's something you're stuck on. My way is not the only way. John's way is not the only way. I am a big fan of study from as many people as you can, and take especially stone setting. There's so many different ways to do it. You're going to find your blend of all the different styles. I'm in this case not necessarily covering the way I would do it. I'm trying to focus on doing it in the way that John has suggested. I will occasionally say something like, here's how I would do it, or in a couple of cases, I've gotten stuck enough on his directions that I go back to something I know and say, this is why I'm backing up and doing it this way. You're always welcome to unmute. If you're not comfortable unmuting and chatting, then you can put it up on chat. I'm just sometimes at a camera where I can't always see the chat right away. If my audio is going in and out or anything, you just need to let me know, or if I've forgotten to move to the camera that it sounds like I'm talking about, because I have 4 cameras here, then just give a shout out. Anybody can poke me for that. And let's see, what else? We have the Rio for Schools program. Now, Rio just upgraded their website, and upgraded is a little bit of a stretch. They're still in the shakedown phase, so it may be a little hard to do this right now. But as somebody attending one of these, I am a Rio for Schools instructor, so you are welcome to use the Rio for Schools code. Right now, I can't tell you for sure that it's going to give you the discounts it should normally give you, but what it usually does is let you upgrade to pro pricing for 6 months. So I'm going to post some things into the chat that you may want to copy out for the directions for how you do that. Even if you're already tagging another teacher in here, they ask that you tag as many teachers as you get these codes from, because it helps them better support those of us that are getting communications like that. Let me see if my system is going to let me actually paste today. Hey, Carmen, good to see you. Copy that and paste it into chat. Where did my chat just go? No,
Hi,
okay.
everyone.
Hello. Okay. Did my chat come up with, oh, it got chopped off. Hang on. I guess I get too long of a post for them. Confirmation. The ending sentence is from Rio Grande, so there's not much more to it.
I think you have to pin yourself because I see myself.
Oh, thank you. Good reminder. Let me spotlight myself now that we're getting going. The other thing that I'm going to talk about briefly, I don't like to do a whole lot of this because I want to get to the good stuff, but I do have actual workshops, full-on classes that are remote. And so I will paste the links for those. That's not what I want to do. You can see it's going to be that kind of a technology day. So if that will paste for me, 2 classes coming up for the rest of the year. One is through Metalworks, which is based out of Boston, but it's a virtual class. That is not this coming weekend, but the weekend after. And we're going to do clasps, all kinds of clasps, lots of clasps, probably more clasps than I should do in a 2-day class. And then in November is going to be Bezels Less Ordinary. I just found out about the Bezels Less Ordinary class that a show that I expected to be on a different weekend got moved to that weekend. I'm going to send out a note to those of you that have already registered when I figure out what that means. I'm not even accepted to the show yet, so I don't know that it even is an issue, but I may move it just in case I get into that show. What else have I forgotten? I think that's the big stuff. At the end, I'll post links to everything like the YouTube and Facebook group and Instagram and stuff like that. But any questions, especially from folks who are brand new? All right, then let's get talking as soon as I can find my chat screen that's gotten lost again. There we go. So today, my goal is to do a few more of the settings from chapter 3 and show you a couple of tools in more detail that I'm using for that. So I've pulled out my Micromotor and hammer handpiece, which I'll be using for 1 or 2 of the settings today. And I have my hot water set up, and I can do a little bit of on-screen demoing of the of using the materials that we've already talked about, the plastics, the various plastics that we're using. I also got set up with the oh my goodness, I'm going to totally blank on the word, the shellac. So I'm going to show some socks. And then I'm going to ask you guys for some support trying to figure out what you think would be the best configuration to hold one of our more challenging settings, actually 2 of our more challenging settings. There's a couple stones that I'm really struggling to figure out how I will position them so that I won't crush the stone while setting. But we're going to do a few basics before we get to that. So let's talk a little bit about this stuff here, which is old school. This is early days. Lots of people would use shellac, and it just comes in flake form. John recommends that you mix in a sprinkling of plaster of Paris, which I've already done to this. It just de-stickifies the material a bit. And then you can either use it on a board, or you can just cut off a stick of some kind and put a little bit of a dop. This is used, a dopping stick is used when you're cutting stones and so on. So this is the same kind of thing. It can be a smaller rod. It can just, you need enough material that it's really going to hold in there. So when I'm setting one of these up, what I am doing, can I get back over to my little alcohol torch? What I'm doing is, you don't want to use your full-scale torch for this. It'll burn too hot. Trust me, I've tried to be gentle with the torch. Oops, I got to turn on the torch before it's going to do anything, because I'm not going to use the torch. Never mind. I'm going to use matches. It's been a very long month, gang. I'm going to catch up with myself one of these days. So all I'm doing is using rubbing alcohol in this, and then getting a fairly good flame. And I have either in a little tin can where I started to melt it out, using something to hold the tin can other than your hands. It'll get quite hot. And this stuff will really burn you if it sticks to you. So I got a bunch stuck onto the end. And then when I'm ready to put a stone into it, I'm just putting it into this low key flame, which is, you're going to see it starting to bubble and smoke. Let me see if I can do it facing you guys. And you don't want it to get dark and crispy. You just want to start getting bubbling. There's a favorite family recipe in my family called a cockeyed cake, which is an eggless chocolate cake that has a brown sugar caramel frosting. And I always think of that's about where I want this to get to. Turn my torch up. I mean, turn my flame up a little bit. I always want this to sort of look like that caramel when you're crisping it up to get it connected to the cake. So it's starting to get a little bubbly. You want to really not get your hands in there, but you want to have enough material that you can set it down in. That was not enough, apparently. Set the setting down in it and get some material pushed up around it so that it holds in place. And what I usually do is use the back end of my tweezers or something. Again, I don't want to be touching this with my fingers. You want to have no material pushing up onto the stone inside of it. So I need to have enough to hold it, but not so much that it's getting in the way. It's a lot easier with a cabochon than it is with a stone with a coulette at the bottom. So that'll do to hold me in place for this setting. Okay. And then I'm going to try to get my teardrop setting, my pear-shaped setting set back down into this. I clearly did not give it enough time to get all bubbly. Do please be careful when you're using the alcohol on your bench, because if you do spill it, it's hard to see the flame when it goes rolling across your bench. So just be really careful with it. And I usually empty out my device here when I'm done with it, because otherwise it'll just evaporate out into the air. It's not a good seal. So I pour it back into an alcohol, closed container of alcohol. So super exciting watching stuff burn. But again, avoid getting it to the point where it starts to blacken. We're just looking to get bubbly, but not too goopy. And it will go all over the place if you don't watch it. I tend to try to rotate it a bit so that I know that I'm moving the molten material around. That's enough. Again, I'm going to push in some of the material that's going to hold it in place. Yeah, I don't know if I got enough, but we'll see. This may pop out on me. not enough to hold it. Getting there though. You know, this has been superseded in a lot of studios by the various plastics that we're going to also work with that I showed you on the last session. Just because this is very, very messy. They all sort of get more pliable as you heat them, and then you get them cold and you can chip off the bits that have come on. But if you get things into a crevice, say, it's a little hard to get some of the material out of small decorative elements. So again, I'm just trying to build up and get close with enough material to sort of hold it down in place.
Why do you prefer this material over the other plastic stuff?
I don't actually prefer it. I'm just trying the various materials that he shows us in the book.
Oh, I see.
Not a material I traditionally work with, but I wanted to try it so we can compare and see
Right.
whether some of them are easier than others. The plastics, I know that's starting to get hard enough for me to just push around a little bit with my hands. The plastics are sort of a go-to if you need flat. Honestly, I do almost no holding of my stones separately, because when I'm using stones, they're usually attached to something large enough that I can just work on the piece. So I'm holding the piece, but because I'm trying to demonstrate his variations, we're trying all these different combos. There's different materials that may behave better or worse for certain settings. For example, I would probably rather do a faceted stone in the plastic because it's less likely to get stuck up in the corners. This is very goopy by the time you're putting things in it, whereas the plastic is more sort of stretch than squish, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
And again, different ways to hold things too. So this one on a piece of wood, you can't really make a sheet of this. You need it on something. This one, I'm able to make a sheet of the stuff by itself and just use that to hold things down. Or you'll see some of the other ones I've got set up have a little knob that I can connect to a vise of some kind. So that gives us, that's just a little bit of the how we play with the materials to get them set. And pieces are going to come off no matter what we do if we put a lot of pressure on them. So those various settings, you're going to probably have to reset some of them. You know, it's part and parcel. And I often get far enough along at times that I want to just hold it in my hands instead of, or on my block without material in the way. Your mileage may vary and it'll depend a lot on the project itself. Let's see. Oh, thank you for whoever's posting the links. So next up, what do we want to do? We had done several settings last session. I'm going to bring those up if I have all of them here. The last couple sessions we were setting heavy walled bezels in ovals. I think there were a couple more that we set, but I'm not seeing them. Did we do this? Did we do the squares last time or the rectangles last time? I think we did, because we talked about the two different types of cornering on that. So we did a few different styles. And one of the big differences for us is the heavier the wall, the harder it's going to be for us to push. So on the thinner walled stuff, we were able to use more traditional bezel pushers. Those of you that were with us on that session, remember that we also built one out of nail per John's directions in the earlier chapters of the book. And he really likes that rectangular shape on the end, as opposed to the ones that come from the factory, usually a little bit more square. But there's plenty of other shapes you can make. You can also make them out of brass rod, which I'm finding I like because it's sort of a less likely to scratch across the stone kind of thing. But as a reminder, the most important thing that it was a eureka moment for me, is that John takes a rough coarse file and taps across it. I had grown up being taught to polish these to a high polish so they don't put marks on your piece, but that makes it extra slippery. And that's a lot of the reason why we go sliding across a stone when we're not being careful enough. But if you put a little bit of texture on it, you're gonna have a little more grip as you're pushing down. So that's one of the ahas for me in reading through in great detail. We also did some setting up of our stones in the Graver's Ball. And I believe we posted the link for this cheapo version of, you can spend the hundreds to thousands of dollars on a GRS, or if you're cheap like me and just want to see if you like it, get one of these, what was it, $86 or something on Amazon that we found. It has similar principles. It's just a much smaller shape and not terribly well calibrated. So it doesn't have all the fancy bells and whistles that you get with GRS Graver. It's enough to sell me on, at some point I'll probably get a good quality one, just to see how much more impressive they are, but it wasn't something I wanted to spend $1,000 on just to play around. The nice thing about this is it can work in several ways. So one of the stones I have ready for us is one of the square cuts, because we talked about corners a little bit. And you can set up with the plastic, you can set it up here and then grip it and work down on the ball. That's as opposed to if I were doing something flat like this, I might just hold it on the bench and work at it from side to side here. I've seen people, this was a cool thing that I haven't yet really fully experimented with. I've seen people put their flat plastic a little thicker straight onto the Graver's Ball while it's still squishy and push it in so that you get holes pushed down in and it grips a little bit better into place. That's kind of cool. I'll play around with that when I get a chance. But either way, what you need is good access to all the angles and good grip on your piece. So your hands are not in your own way and so that the tools have access to things. Questions before I actually get into setting some things? Actually, I'm not going to do a square one because we did those rectangles. I'm going to do one of the other ones. I'm going to do the, let's actually put the Graver's Ball aside, see if this is solid enough. Let's work on a Pear setting.
Yeah,
Just a
the
reminder. I'm
pointy,
sorry.
oh, sorry. The Pear is good because this pointy thing is
Yep.
so difficult. I've broken many.
It's very difficult. And the big thing, which I have already done for this stone, see if you can, I think I've got it marked in blue. You might be able to see it right at the tip. The trick is on any corner, you're going to take a decent sized ball burr and drill almost halfway through the material. You don't want to go all the way through. You don't want to start seeing the marks on the other side, but you need a little pocket of air there where the points are. And this is right as the step meets the upper wall. That's what I'm aiming sort of diagonally in towards that with a ball burr.
Rachel,
Yeah.
we've lost your screen.
Oh, shoot. That's weird. Let me start a video again on my back.
You're back now.
Okay. That was a weird blip. Usually you lose all of me or none of me.
Yeah, I was seeing you the whole time.
You were? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what's
Me
going
too.
on.
I didn't lose you.
So what I'm doing is I pre-drilled the hole in here and I'm literally just using a ball burr at about this kind of an angle to get in there and being slow instead. I mean, I need a decent speed on it, but I want to not take a whole lot of material away because what I'm doing with that is use my magic drawing board. I'll do this in big scale. So we've got our Pear and we've got the outer wall and then there's this inner wall inside and the point of the stone is going to rest right in here, right? So right where we meet here is where the point hits. So what we're doing by creating that little pocket is we're giving ourselves a space, a gap that when we push down, there's room for it to scooch a little bit and have that pressure. If we don't do that, any amount of pressure where the point hits the wall is what's causing the chip. By simply adding a little pocket in there where the point is going to hit, it gives that leeway that we're less likely to chip it. Doesn't mean it's not a guarantee. You can still put too much force on it. Yep.
Yep.
Rachel, I just wanted to remind you, last time you said you were gonna take photos. I just wanted to make sure before you set.
Oh, of the settings before and after? Oh, shoot.
Well, I don't know if I usually use my camera. You can just take a picture with your camera, probably.
Yeah, you know what? I'm recording. I am recording, aren't I? Am I recording?
Yeah.
Okay. So I can take snapshots out of the video if I need to. But
Okay.
yeah, I'll try to set up. Thank you for that. I'll try to set up for that better for next time. So this is a top view of what we're building in, is that little pocket. So I already drilled this one in preparation. And of course we want, the stone should be nice and clean of marks and so on. And by this time you should have done a good job of filing and sanding down your height so that it's not too big of a stone. I mean, not too tall of a wall, rather, for the stone. If you are having troubles with that step of it, I recommend you get one of these kinds of thin Sharpies, the ones that have the narrow, they're the fine point, ultra fine point, and you rest on your, let me see if I can get a good angle for you guys that you'll see it. So you're resting on the edge of your stone and you're drawing a line, keeping your pen at that same angle all the way around. So what that does is it gives you essentially the amount of height that's created by the tip of the pen above where the stone edge ends. By doing that, you're giving yourself just enough material to do that hold over. So when you do that and then take the stone back out and file down to that line, it gives you a nice, clean, consistent height all the way around. If you're like me in your early stone setting days, you may have had stones that when you look at them from the top, they're kind of wonky. Like if I were looking at this stone from the top, I used to get stones where I'd have like a bezel wall that would do this, because it's not well cut down. And that just means that I left it. There were differences in the heights of the walls. My goal at all times on a nice clean cut stone, unless I'm doing something intentional, like taking the front corner down, is to have a nice even height visually, right? Now that doesn't mean that it's the same height of wall all the way around, because our stones are cut sometimes a little wonky. So I might intentionally do something like drive it down to a point to emphasize that point, but I want it to be an intentional act. And so that before you get even to sitting it into a setting, you want to clean that up to the point that you've filed it neatly. This one is one of those heavy walled settings that we did. So I'm going to actually work on it to show, I'm going to use this as an example to show you the hammer hand piece, because that's a lot easier on the hand with a heavy gauge bezel. And I use 2 or 3 bits more than any other. I use this rectangular one that looks an awful lot like the tip of one of the hand setting devices, right? Or I use the rocker one that, no surprise, looks a lot like a bezel rocker in its form. And then occasionally for detailed work, I'll go down to one of the little squares. I rarely use any of the point-based tips for my setting, but you can get some really cool effects if you do it intentionally, like you can get a dotted look. Just know that they each have slightly different impacts. And just like with the setting tools, I blunt the edges of the ones that I get. As soon as I buy them, a set, I'm going to blunt down, and then I put them on the Tripoli or another cutting compound, so I don't have any sharp, scratchy bits with it. Okay. What I have done to the end of this is just like I would do for the other hand tools, is I take my rough file and just do a couple of quick passes to rough it up. You don't do that every time. You just only when it starts to get smooth again for any reason, just enough that it has grip. And then this is sort of pencil-like. There's different people like to hold it different ways. I like to sort of grip it solidly and close to the end so that I've got similar control to if I were holding a handheld device. Or a non-mechanical device, I guess I should say. They're all handheld. And there's two different types of hammer hand pieces. The ones that you have that you buy for your Fordham or for your flex shaft are always on, okay? The reason for the one that I have, which is attached to what's called a micromotor, this is an antique Fordham micromotor. They are much smaller now and much glossier looking, but this is their very first model. These models, the motor is stupidly expensive, and what it does for you that's different, besides having a forward and back if you need it for anything and having speed control, is it is pressure based. So I'm going to turn it on, and I'm leaving it on foot pedal, but I could do it on manual if I wanted to. And even though I press the foot pedal down, you'll hear it, but it's not actually making any push until I put pressure against it. See how it starts to shake my finger? So when I'm pressing, the motor is going, there's nothing happening here until I have pressure. And that's the magic. It's the jackhammer approach. So if you get one of these for your regular Fordham, it'll be in constant jackhammer mode. It'll be moving like that all the time. So it's a little harder to control. I like this micromotor version because I can now put it in place, start it up, and as long as I don't put pressure down, it gives me the control. And it's only once I start pushing against it that I get the jackhammer effect. This is because I work with gold and other heavy bezels, this is a magical device that saves me a lot of work. I can't do by hand what I can do with this. That said, if you only have the funds for a regular one for your Fordham, for your flex shaft, that's better than nothing. You'll still be in love with it shortly after you start using it on heavy bezels. Let's see, great tip, seeing the whole time. Set some, yeah, the machine perfect stones. If you can find machine perfect stones, it's an amazing thing. So almost all stones need that little tip of using the pen. Sorry, I'm playing catch up on what's on chat. Okay, so here's where I'm going to remind you that John differs in his opinion of point work from a lot of people I've taken stone setting with. Most people say start at the points and work your way out. John does not do that. John starts with his north, south, east, west, and then works towards the point later. So for this, we're going to start with across the piece, and it's still an in and slightly up, not down yet. We're trying to get our first pass of pushing the stone in for holding it in place. I'm going to try and do this without, I would normally be crouched over this and blocking the camera view. So I'm going to try and do this. Because this is such a heavy wall, as a reminder back to really early when we built this, the heavy top wall is filed down at a bit of an angle. So what we're aiming for is to push against that angled wall and start to get it pushing in from one side and then the other. So I'm pushing in and up, and I'm just using the hammer action. It's going to be, because it's heavy walled, it's going to be small movement. Now I don't have a whole lot of leeway with the point there, so I'm going to do a little bit on the top edge, but not all the way at the point. And then opposite. And this is slow going because it's such a heavy bezel. So there's a lot of movement happening, but it's not going all the way over until I get a lot further along. I'm going to go down towards the bottom. And I'm always trying to work my opposites, even if one opposite looks like it's fairly connected to the piece. And the reason that we work back and forth is that if we don't, we might start tilting the stone by the force of the direction we're pushing the metal. So it gradually gets lifted up on one side or the other. And then it's hard to correct from that after the fact. So I've now got sort of 6 positions pushed a little bit in. And you can see it's starting to get it held in place, but it's still got a lot of movement. I'm going to now look for gaps and push in and up. Again, trying to work opposite. In and up. And I would not have even gotten a quarter of this level of movement if I were doing this by hand. I think this is, what did we do, 18 gauge or maybe even thicker than that? The heavy walled ones that we did. I'd have to check my notes.
Rachel, are you using the hammer like you showed us the bezel where you start on the bottom and you go up?
So remember, this is, that was on cabochons, and so the bottom was flat. This is where it's hit, it is the bottom, but the bottom is where the stone is resting on the inner wall.
Okay.
That's a great question. I should have made that distinction for you. So let me actually draw the difference. So when we were working last time, we were working on cabs where our wall is doing this, right? And our goal is to push in from the bottom until it goes there and then at the angle. So it's this and then that. And what that does is it pushes us sort of like that, right? Until we then gradually work it in. Because we're working with a faceted stone, let me draw a better faceted stone than that. The bottom isn't quite the bottom. What's happening is we've got our inner wall sitting there and our outer wall that we're trying to push up and over. So there's no use pushing here. All that's going to do is actually splay it out and risk the stone because it's pushing underneath. So this becomes our bottom. And so we're pushing, again, same action, in and then up. So it's this kind of, I move into position. So in and up as I lift, okay? That's all inward and then tucking up a little bit, but not way up. And because it's a thick walled bezel, we're going to come back and do a later pass where we come down on the top of the thick wall, but we got to get a lot closer before we do that. So yes, great point that the book refers to it more about focusing on your in at the bottom. And really we want to be at the level that we're going to be pushing the base, the bottom portion of our upper wall forward. Is that clear?
So where the actual, I forgot what you call it.
The wall of the step?
Where it curves in and the line is right there.
At the, you mean at the,
Here, yeah, what do you call that again?
oh gosh, if you hadn't asked me. Crown, what is it?
The girdle?
Yeah, the girdle. Yeah.
The girdle.
So are you focusing on where the girdle is and then you're going?
So it's
little
actually
bit
right
in?
below the girdle. Because if you think about it, the girdle is what rests on that wall, right? The girdle is the portion against which our material inside sits just below it. So if we have a giant version of our stone with the girdle, right? And our facets, what we've built for walls are designed to fit right here and right here where it's resting just below the girdle. And then our outer wall runs alongside that girdle. And we're going to be aiming to push it over, not that far. It's going to be a shorter stem than that. But we're going to aim to push it over at that point, which is why we need to push in and then in from the angles. So we can't, we're only pushing it in enough that it's butted up against the girdle. And then the rest of it is that over push to start tipping it forward. Because if we only do an angled push, let me see if I can articulate in drawings what happens if we only do a downward push. So if we've got our wall here and we only push from this direction, we're going to get a little bowing. It's going to do this. And it's going to leave that kind of a gap because we've got it snug up against. So, I mean, we don't have it snug up against. So if we push in and then lift to get that forward angle, what happens is we get more of a flat on to the stone.
Okay.
It's one of those things that the more you do, the more it'll click in your hindbrain. It's not Like I almost never work under a microscope, and people who do probably can show you more specifically. In fact, there's probably great YouTube videos of microscopic, what happens in the stages as it moves over. But think about, you don't want if you start doing this too much, you're going to have pocketing in there, and it's going to be room for the stone to lift and move. Oops, I'm out of frame. If you get your curve this way instead of this way, right? This is going to leave room for the stone to get loose and move. Whereas following this down gets you a much snugger hold on the stone. That was a lot of rambling. I hope that you got something out of it.
No, I mean, fried brain. I mean, I totally forgot that. I mean, depends on the stone. So like you
Definitely
said,
depends on the
cabochon.
stone.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Rachel, can
Yeah.
I ask a question? I have a question on the hammer handpiece that you're
Yeah.
using.
Yeah.
Because I'm used to using the one on the flex shaft, but I recently got a micromotor.
Yep.
And so when I'm not used to that action where you have to do the pressure before it starts.
Yeah.
So do you place it first and then just move it up, or do you move it? You don't move it side to side at all, right?
I am when I'm using the tool actively, yeah, you'll see
Yeah.
in a few steps. Right now, I'm still doing the individual point positions, but when I
Right.
get further down, you're going to see me holding it in place and working it slowly along the wall.
Oh, okay.
So, but again, I would be starting my pedal, but not actually pushing hard enough to do anything. So if I just sit here, I get no action on the stone. It's only when I start to push, that I start to pop things out, that it actually makes the hammering action.
Okay, great.
Clearly, I
Thank
have
you.
more pushing in and down to do before we go any further.
Thank
The
you.
other thing to remember is these hammer handpieces are not 100% interchangeable. You can't just have one for your Fordham and then use it on the micromotor. Only certain models have that reciprocity thing that I was just describing.
Yeah,
So
the one
make
on
sure that
my
you're-
my flex shaft does not, it's the always on, and the one
Yeah.
on the micromotor is like you have. And
Well,
so I'm just
yeah.
not used to the difference.
So some of the models, if you move this over to your flex shaft, it would just behave the way that any other would on the flex shaft.
Oh,
There's nothing
yeah.
that will behave the way I'm describing from the micromotor on the flex shaft. But some of the ones that work the way the flex shaft works them are transmittable over to use this way on the micromotor. You have to look at the fine print on the Fordham site for each model, because they have more than one style, is what I'm saying. And the ones that you get for this device are much more expensive than the ones
Yes.
that don't do this stop. So I could get one that never stops for my micromotor. I can't get one that stops for my flex shaft.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, I'm going to go back to try and get some heavy push on the material. So again, it's an up and in and up. And I'm not going way up. That's the important part. We're not ready for that push down, even though this is a heavy bezel, and we'll get to that. So what I'm looking for are the big bumps until I think I've got the majority of them in. And then I'm going to move up to the tip and work that a little bit. Got enough metal move that I'm comfortable not having to switch every single bump. But you got to get a fair amount of movement to get there. And now I'm going to work my way up to the front. Don't be freaked out. You may see bits of the shellac chipping. That always reminds me it's not the stone I'm seeing chip, it's the bits of shellac. It's all good. So on this one, I did a careful job of filing down towards the front. So I don't have a whole lot of point material in the way. You may recall from our last session, those of you that were doing that we're here for the rectangles, that we have a few choices when it comes to a point. One is we can saw down with an 8/0, an 8/0 saw blade, and cut a slice in and then push together, cut a slice in and push together until we have a clean fit. Another is that we can file it. In this case, there's so little extra metal at that point that I'm going to do the filing approach. If I can get access to it that's the downside of sticking it into something goopy, is that you don't always have the position you need. So I'm going to just carefully thin my tip a little bit. I'm watching that I don't go through the metal. I just want to take away some of the excess to thin it out. And I'm being really careful not to hit my stone. So just a little bit of thinning right at the tip before I go back and do a little more hammer push. And again, that drill mark that I put in the front means that I don't have to worry as much about this downward pressure getting in the way of chipping the stone. But now I can take a little more concrete action to the sides. And I'm still, just like I would on a cab or anything, I'm looking for where do I have big gapping and trying to work it in. You'll find on the more unusually shaped stones, certain areas are easier to fold than others. The long stretches or the gentler curves are going to be a lot easier to push down than the tight corners. Pressing more metal on the corners than anywhere else. Okay, so I've now got enough push down that I'm going to start working the whole stretch. And this is what I was just describing, is working my way along the piece, where I'm now just gently pushing to work a smooth line. So I did that stretch to there. So it's slow and steady, just pushing along. And that gives me it starts to clean up. It starts to burnish the setting. How to get the control you need.
So you don't have to do the north, south, east, west anymore?
No, at this point, I've got it held enough that I'm comfortable to start doing a little bit more directed draw across it. And again, it being heavy, I've got to put a fair amount of effort into getting it pushed down. So I've got movement here still, but I've got my main points pushed fairly solidly in place. Now I'm working on closing the fold. So north, south, east, west, as much as we can with the weird point, was what I was doing at the first. So I was doing the opposites and then the opposites on each side. And then go back and do the smooth.
So are you also able to use the same tip to texture or no?
So this one I probably wouldn't use for texturing. This I would probably go to either a point or the little square or something that gives me a little bit more concrete. I mean, I suppose if you angled it, you could get some texture out of it.
Okay.
Or I'd do a final pass with, the hammer, the nail that I modify that I really like for stone setting. That's what I do for the majority of my heavily textured bezels. Because then I've got a fine point that's a little more chiselly than this is. Do I have any chisel tips? I don't think I have any manufactured chisel tips. So I'd probably modify my own if I wanted one in here, but I tend to do by hand, the texturing. Because it feels a little more controlled to me. So I'm not terribly happy with the fit in the back. It's way looser than I'd like, which probably means I was a little too big in my setting. I may be able to overcome it with the pressure in the right direction. So what I'm doing here this isn't going to hurt me when it's going back and forth unless I pinch myself in it. What I'm doing is giving it a little support to control where I am hitting downward. Right along. And remember that this is work hardening your piece, so it will steadily become harder to get movement in the work. Okay, so we're starting to see the outline, but I've still got some good gaps in there that I need to cover. I've got gapping a little bit here, a little bit here, and a lot here, unfortunately. This is slightly too big a setting for this stone. I'm going to try to get a little more in from the back and a little this for it to get closer to the edge. That's improving, but I'm still not thrilled by the amount of gapping I'm seeing at the back. Much improved on the side. So what I don't know if you guys can see just how much it's getting movement in there. It's making me unhappy. It's doing fairly well towards the front, but the back is looser. So I've still got a ways to push downward, which, as a reminder, on the heavy wall bezel, we're also going to do a pass almost straight down, but I'm not where I want to be before I start that pass. It's just a little too much. Push out. Leave it. Again. Somebody off mute. It doesn't mean to be.
Drop lead. Good drop lead. Good job.
Their question? Hang on a sec, gang. I'm going to mute whoever's chatting. There we go. Okay, questions while I'm here? No, okay, I'm gonna keep going for a bit.
Well, I don't have a question, but I would like to see closer.
Yeah, so I can't get much closer on this. Well, maybe I can do a little zooming. Let's see. Hang on a sec. Is that too fuzzy or is that
No, that's great. That's great.
Okay, so the granularity isn't gonna bother you guys?
No, not to me. I just want to see how you move the machine, the handpiece.
How it works? Okay, so I'm gripping this way. Some people like to hold it more like a pencil, but it's got such weird weight to it that I find that off balances me. So I'm doing a fairly solid grip and I'm supporting it with a finger. So, and sort of one finger is holding the stone and the other is holding, bracing the hammer itself. What I'm trying to do is get a little more of this back wall, the tail of it pushed down. I may have to do a little more pressure from the front just to push it back away.
It froze.
Pardon?
You froze. Okay, no, you're okay now.
Am I back? Okay. So this piece can now, it's been popping itself out. Yeah, this is way too loose still, because obviously I can pull that out. So what I'm getting is too much gapping here and here, and a lot of gap in the back. If I were
You're a
to do
little out of,
justice-
you're a little out of frame.
Thank you. If I were to do justice to this stone, I would probably pause and go rebuild this setting before trying to set it down, because it's just got a little too much in the butt end of the teardrop. So it's going to be a challenge to get it set down solidly. And I can also, if I get to this point on a heavy bezel and I'm getting jammed up, especially because I can still take the stone out right now, I can help myself by thinning it further by filing it down. Because remember, on the angles of the heavy bezels, or on the walls of the heavy bezels, we've already put this nice clean angle in here. And by thinning it further, that makes the walls a little more flexible. So I'm going to take this down a bit further and see if I can recover from just how thick those walls are.
And what gauge approximately that is?
So I'm pretty sure we did this one in 18 gauge and then double thickness. It would have been, what did we do? Probably 24 gauge for the inner wall, but 18 gauge for the outer wall. I have the board behind me and I'll go check it when we get to a break point. So these are very challenging when they're this heavy to get the material to move. Very, very hard to do by hand unless you're doing a hammer setting, which we did some of on the last session, and I can do a little more of on one of these stones as well. So again, right now, and it actually looks kind of nice when you do this kind of thinning at this stage, because you've got the angle that you're going to be following is nice and easy to be clear on where you want to file. So
yeah.
if you can see, it's starting to perk up a little bit, how nice and smooth it is. This is why when we're done doing all of our actual setting, we will be doing some filing and cleanup with either the hand files or the wheels to get a nice clean look like this on the bottom of it, or on the top of it rather. Okay, so I've thinned it down a little bit. I'm going to see if that's going to be enough. I'm not sure it will be, but we'll see. Put that back in there. I'm going to use this just as a brace for now. See if I can get that now thinned out metal to push even further. And so at this point, I'm going a little higher up than the first pass.
You're out of frame.
Getting steeper. And just because I know I can pop the stone still, I'm going to do a little bit of that north, south, east, west business. More down at the bottom. or at the top point. Okay, we're getting a lot more stable. I'm going to take this out. So now we're in a position that I'd be hard pressed to get it out, but it's still loose. I'm going to bring this over to the other camera just so you guys can see how much gapping I'm seeing. And I'm going to encourage you to consider remaking a setting if you have this much gap. Let's see, oops, that's not where I meant to be. That's where I meant to be. So here's the good quality zoom camera. And so we've still got a little movement, which is no good. You don't want to leave a stone with any wiggle. But we're starting to get support on the front, so it's not moving a lot here. Up at the top, it's mostly because I have two, my curve back here is a little, I'm out of camera. My curve is a little too wide. You guys seeing that? Back here?
Yes, yes.
So I can still keep working that downward pressure because I've got good catch from about here on up on the stone. It's this part down at the end that's giving me my wobble. Okay, so I'm going to give it a few more moments on that. And try to get it even further down. And now I'm just working my way around the top edge to sort of work down and smooth at the same time. Nice thing about these micromotors is you can change the speed on it if you're having a hard time controlling it. I wouldn't probably use quite such a fast speed if I were setting, say, an opal. Getting better, but it's still not happy making. Question? Okay, so we're a lot less wiggle, but my problem spot is still right from about here to here. And it's purely because I made this setting too big for this stone. But you can see that it's not coming out at this point. It's just still clicking, which is unappealing and can loosen over time. So I've got a little bit of gap here and a lot of gap back here. Otherwise, I'm doing pretty well. So I'm going to now try moving over towards almost directly upright on that upper line. And that's going to be the downward push. This is the part that for me is always the hardest because I need to be careful enough to get straight up and down, but not actually hit the stone. And this is that action that John describes on the thicker bezels that gives that final push downward so it's not getting out of the stone, out of the setting rather. Question? Sorry, with the hammer going, I can't tell whether the noise is being made or somebody acting. Okay, we are so much closer to being fully set after that pass. I'm gonna bring it back over so you guys can see the difference. Come on, focus, little camera. So now I've got just the slightest bit of movement in there. I can get it to move a smidge. If I keep going along this path and then do a little more filing and smoothing, I'll be able to push it the rest of the way down is my guess. It's still, again, I would have rather gone back and redone the bezel size down a little bit, which before I had the stone locked in place, one way to do that on these, remember we soldered up here. So it's plausible that I could slice down here and take a segment out as if I were resizing a ring, but I run the risk of opening that line back up. So it's that's why I'm not doing it on camera right now, just because that would take more time than it's worth and we might not have a bezel at the end. But yes, if you get into this kind of a jam, think about it. There's a good section in a paragraph or two in the section on, it's either the square cuts or the dreaded emerald cuts, where he talks about if your fit, it doesn't quite fit at the end of it, you saw into your seams and your corners. Similarly on this, I could saw in here, but my problem is really more at this end. And so I'd have to really be snugging. If I were to cut down this line again, I'd have to be like taking and squeezing and really reshaping the back end to do that. So it's doable, just not while we're in the middle of a project like this for stone setting. Questions so far?
So
yep.
I have a question about the size itself, because I know I remember this piece where you had to saw and solder and saw and solder.
This one, I don't think so. This was, I mean, this getting the corner was all about you saw down until you get a clean fit. You saw down until you get a clean fit. But this one wasn't the ones that really fought me.
Okay.
It was, I did not do a good enough job of seeing how it sat on the back wall. I should have made this a snugger fit. with heavy bezel, I find I have problems with that more with heavy bezels than not, because it feels like there's the material to hold it, but then as soon as I start pushing and stretching, it loosens up where I think the metal is going to fold.
Mhm.
But
Can you
yeah.
put your camera back?
Oh, sure. Sorry. I've been waving my hands at you guys. I've been like, and then this and the thing. Yeah. So I think that this was the area, this was what I was cutting into for these. These are one at, pear shape is actually one of my favorite stones to make a setting for, because I really like that idea of wrapping it and sort of holding it in place and getting the line. But because it was heavy walled, I think I did not do a good enough job of judging. Happens. I do that on a regular basis, and I have to redo my bezels. Hopefully not the ones I'm working on in gold.
So
Yeah.
one question. So this one, where's the seam?
The seam is at the top there. So this is, I'll draw the seam on this one, because that's the topic that we're discussing, is would I have cut it open again at the seam, or would I have tried to leave that seam alone? So on the pear, what we've got is, right, and we've made this our seam. Because if you follow John's directions for the teardrop shape, for the pear shape, you're going to be making these come past one another and then slicing down the middle, so that what you're getting.
Can you please
is-
bring your,
Oh, I'm on the wrong camera
the
again. I'm
camera,
sorry. Yep, and let me zoom
Thank
back
you.
out, or else you won't be able to see this. Wrong direction. There we go. I think that's too zoomed in. Come back. I think that's as zoomed as I get. Does not look right to me. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So I've been doodling away. So what we're doing is the seam is at the top there. And we started life with these corners like that. And then sawed down the middle of them, sawed down the middle of them, sawed down the middle of them, until we got to the angle shape on each one. So in trying to, if I were to try to repair this, my two real big choices are either resaw this and reshape the whole end of it, or try to block the heat in some way and cut down the other side and take some material out, take a slice out of it. There's a reason that jewelers only want to resize rings if they can see where the seam is, because it would be very easy to overheat and pop this out, especially in silver. It'd be a little bit easier of a fix if we were working in gold to take this segment out.
Got it.
Okay. So question to you, gang. Do you actually want to sit here and watch me continue to hammer this down? Or do you want me to work on some of the other settings?
Something else.
Something else? Anybody strongly object to going to something else?
Rachel, why would it be different in gold?
So gold doesn't transmit heat the same way that silver does. So gold, when you're working on it, has much more point focus on the heat, whereas with silver, the heat is going to travel around to that other side and be harder to block. So it's more likely to heat up enough that the seam would unseal, that it would start to flow. Gold
Thank
is
you.
about point work.
So Rachel, at this point, if it fit the way you wanted it to,
Yep.
Would you be using like a rubberized wheel or
Yeah.
something to smooth everything out?
I think I really liked how much, let me actually just do that little bit. I'm going to clean this up again with the file. I really liked how the angle worked with the file, and it cleans it up nicely. So in the book, John talks about using hand files and or the rubberized wheels, or both. And so I would probably start cleaning up. If I wanted a super clean look, I'd probably start cleaning up like this with the larger file, because it's such a big piece that I can stay out of my own way and get a nice clean look. Let me see if I can get this one side cleaned this way, and then you guys can see how it compares to the unfiled side. So I can go fairly strongly on this because it is such a heavy wall bezel. So just that little bit of cleanup, and maybe I need to go over to the good camera. Just that little, oh, come on, come with me, camera. There we go. So this little wall of difference, see if you can see. I'm going to back off a little bit on the zoom because it's a little too fuzzy.
I can see perfect.
You see it? Okay. So this is the side I filed,
That
and
looks
this is the
good.
side that's still rough from the hammer texture.
Mhm,
So just that little bit of cleanup really brightens it up.
mhm.
And then if we were to take the rubberized wheel on top of that, it would really sparkle. And then if we were to take our graver and bright cut just that inside line, bling, we would pop. So that's the series of things I would probably do to this big of a stone to give it that real poppy at the edge, really poppy. Or I'd go completely in the opposite direction and I'd hammer texture the whole thing.
Do you know what cut your file was? That did a great job.
So my files are very special files that do not equate to modern day files, because I've managed to find a treasure trove of unused files from 1923 still in their boxes. And steel is not the same as it was back then. It sounds kind of ridiculous, but I'll tell you, this is theoretically, this is a 3, which I'm betting equates to something extra fine in modern files.
Yes, awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, they're more stabby on the top, the older ones. If you guys happen to find yourself in, you know, junk stores that have a lot of tools, that's a great clue. The tips of older files are like shiv somebody level of sharp compared to, do I have one of my modern day, I mean, my old fashioned files? Well, you're going to see it on some of the basic, you're going to see a blunter tip on the ends of more modern files. They just aren't making them that sharp. And even if they're a little rusty, the older ones are worth getting and investing the time to clean them up, because they're going to be more durable and they're going to cut faster. I literally had to teach myself how to control my file again when I found these, because they cut so much faster than modern day files. So keep an eye out for the good ones.
I have a 6 and it's amazing. I guess 6 is.
Yeah. Almost polishes things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Files are one of those tools that you spend the money on. Don't, other than the itty bitty little, like, you know, that you're going to break them no matter what you do. Like these I buy as a perishable personally. The Euro tools, I get a set about every year or two. But the big files use the highest quality you can afford. And if you have friends in Europe who can buy files for you, the same brands are manufactured differently there. Probably better quality if you can get some of the actual Swiss-made Swiss files instead of the US manufactured ones. So yeah, go spend the money on your good files. More questions on this before I go on to something else? Because that was a lot more time than I anticipated spending on that one, because it's fighting me. All right, so we have, where's one of my funky settings? We have the tongue setting. I've been looking forward to setting the tongue setting for a while. And I think I'm going to change the brightness on this, because otherwise you guys aren't going to be able to see this little white file. So this tongue setting, as you may or may not recall if you've been here, is one of those caps that we made that is going to fit this weird little, not surprisingly, tongue-shaped stone. And so this gives us one of our challenges in that we have to come in at it from the side. I may have put too much plastic on this one, so we'll find that out together. This is where I think the graver ball is going to really help me, because I'll be able to change the angle I'm working at. But I have literally never set one of these. So I'm going to be learning along with you guys. So what I have done is set it up so that I can get in at an angle from a couple of sides. And there's still a north, south, east, west on these. So I'm just going to try and push in from one side and then the other. And it's going to wobble around on me until I get some grip on it, I think. And that includes getting some grip on my graver ball. Am I still in screen for you guys? I am. Good. So I'm just pushing in. This is, I think, 22 or 24 gauge. It must be 24 gauge. That's moving way too easily. And I lied. I'm going to not quite do north-south because I can see that I need to hold the piece at the ends a little bit before I can get the center. And I'm probably going to have to pop this out of the plastic to get a really good set. So I'm just pushing, I'm still doing my opposites, but I'm pushing to grip a little bit. And then I'm going to work the corners that are not quite holding opposite each other. And this is in the family of settings where John said he sometimes adds a bit of epoxy. This felt like to me it had enough height on the bezel that I'm going to try it without epoxy. We'll find out if it falls out on me. But the difference on when you would want to and when you wouldn't is, do you have enough curve that when you close over it, it's tighter in around the belly of whatever it's holding. Some stones you won't be able to get that, like the, a pearl set is hard. You can't push hard enough to really grip it, with a few exceptions. I'll sometimes set a half pearl with prong settings or with serrated bezel or something like that. And you can get up the walls with that, but it's still good to have the extra support of the glue in that case. So this is a delight to set compared to the heavy wall. I can feel the metal moving by hand at least. But it is definitely still wanting to wobble. It's kind of like a loose tooth.
It's so
And
funny. It looks like soap. I'm sorry.
It does.
Looks
I
like
don't
soap.
know what the material is. Some kind of jasper, but I don't know what. Does anybody know what the white jasper is? Nope. Okay. But it's a pretty little stone, and it's not a color or a shape that I would normally work in. But the fact that it wasn't a color I worked in made it even more interesting to me when I was picking stones for this project. Because then I'm trying other materials as well. So I'm definitely working myself into a bit of a corner because of how closely I've got this fitted. So I'm going to see if I can get it out of the plastic. I may have to heat some water up to get it out, or I may be able to just sneak it out. Don't want to risk the stone. I need to get something in there that I can pry it up with. I think I recall that I have a jump ring on the bottom of this design, so I may not actually be able to get it fully pried up until I heat it up, but we'll see what this does. Well, maybe I can keep it in place, but just move material out of the way. That would work too. Some more leeway. So corners on this particular shape are proving to be extra tricky because they're tiny little corners. It's not quite as it's almost deeper of a corner than when I do a square stone or something, because I have to hit the combination of the slight curve. It's more like a trillion corner to me in the way that the material behaves as you're compressing it. So this may take a little corner filing. You could carefully saw those corners, but I'm not sure I would risk it with the tongue being where it is. I think I'm a little too clumsy to get those corners sawed well. And then I think I have gone as far as I can go without getting this out. So I'm going to go heat up some water, which will take a couple moments, but while I'm letting that boil, I'll look at one of the other settings we got. So let me bring this over to the other bench so you can see up close where we are. And you can see this weird little contraption that I have set up. Looks a little bit like a pacifier at this point. So this was just flattened plastic material enough to give myself the grip. And then I pushed my material up and around the setting, but I just pushed it a little higher than is convenient to get the last of this setting in. And so it's like a loose tooth right now. I can get a little bit of left-right wiggle. I can get a little bit less forward and back wiggle, but until I can get access to that back area, I'm not going to be able to get more setting on that. So let me turn on the hot water for a sec to get that a little more mobile. And meanwhile, what else have we got on the bench to play with? And what time are we at? We are at 6 o'clock. Okay, we're good. So one that I have been looking forward to is, this is our double setting. So that buried in that plastic, there is the other side of this, and this is going to be 2 bullets, one facing each direction. So I'm going to try setting that one while the water boils, which maybe I won't have time to even get this set up because that water is boiling super quick. Let's see what we got. And what I'm doing here with these weird settings is I'm going to gradually work towards the really, really hard ones. We're not going to get all of them done today. But there's a few that like I said at the beginning, I'm having a hard time envisioning just what position to put them in. That is way too much material for me to work with. Well, maybe not. In place. I'm having a hard time figuring out what is going to hold them, but not make it hard to access, and not make something like the cap or the jump ring on it fly off as I'm setting. I'm going to switch back to where I'm doing the melt because my water is literally boiling that quickly. And I got to be careful not to do this again. I wouldn't put an opal in the hot water. Let's get this pot over here. Gotta actually unplug, hang on. I just got one of those little, these are those little camp ones where you can pop them up. I don't know if you guys can see it from where you are. I'm probably zoomed in too much. It's just a little hot pot that collapses when you don't use it, don't need it. And it likes to boil very quickly when you have a good power source for it. So I'm just going to be careful not to put the stone too far in, while also not wanting to scald my fingers. And again, I like to have a pair of pliers, a pair of tweezers or something, so I can start to work the material away as needed.
Rachel, where did you get your camping kettle?
I think because it needs electricity, it can't actually be a genuine camping kettle, but I think I just found it on Amazon or something. I'll see if I can dig up my receipt and tell you guys what the model was. I wanted one that didn't take up a whole lot of space because I've got a lot of equipment in my studio and not a lot of storage. I may have to actually hold this in the water for a bit. So this is the Kevlar based stuff, the jet ballistic. The white stuff that you see in some of the settings I'm doing is the cheaper friendly plastic. I'm still not sold on spending, there we go, spending a whole lot of extra money on the ballistic. The ballistic definitely has a little more squishable nature to it. So this is where we are so far, but there's still a little bit too much wobble in this setting. So the jet ballistic is nice. It's easier to squish up around the stone than the friendly plastic is. And it doesn't cool down quite as quickly, so you've got a little more time to shape and manipulate it. But it's a little more flexible. I don't need that anymore. So I don't know that I exactly want I don't know. I'm feeling mixed about which one I would pick, but I'm not sure I think that it's worth the money to spend on the jet ballistic when you can get 5 times as much of the other stuff for the same price. So what I'm now going to do is try to tighten up the bits that I couldn't before at the corners. And that may include a little bit of filing, but I'm going to try and avoid it because I'd forgotten I'd put a pattern on this bezel, although I've scratched the heck out of it by trying to peel it out. So I'm just trying to work without destroying my jump ring. And I have, I think I've shown you guys my cheat for corners, which is grabbing the flat pliers. Flats. Where did you guys go? So I was traveling. Part of my trip back east was to also take a Michael Good class. And so I'm a little kerfuffled because I haven't managed to put all my tools away from that. It was a great class. If you like that kind of work, it's worth doing. Yeah, this is not, my trick is not going to work on these teeny tiny little corners. They're a little too small. I'm going to have to get in there and push and file. And I think the trick is mostly at this point, I need the filing. I'm seeing why John is recommending epoxy. This definitely feels like if I worked at it, I could pull it out because I don't have the height that I really need to hold it in. I'm gonna file a little bit on my corners, very, very delicately, so that I'm not mucking with the pattern too much. And then I'm gonna try to fold those corners in a little bit snugger and see if that helps. But again, having the pattern on here is another good reason to add that drop of epoxy instead of going and wrecking it with the cornering that I'm doing. And I invariably forget when I'm setting a stone. I get really aggressive with my setting sometimes, and I forget if I have a bail on the back of it or a jump ring on the back of it, and I'll snap one off every once in a while. Some of that is about, using the tools you have a little better than I tend to. Having the graver ball, I could potentially set this up carefully to be held by that jump ring so that it doesn't have the downward pressure on it. I'm just so accustomed to most of my setting being done in my hands by hand that it's hard to break those habits and still get, I don't have the positioning that I want unless I'm holding it. Okay, that's helping a fair amount to get those corners a little more snug. And I think I want to do a little burnishing on the edges of this to try and push it down further. This one's going to be a tricky stone to burnish because it's super easy to hit the stone at this angle. So I got to be really light touch. Just scraping down. Remember that the burnishing is an added pressure onto that firm push down onto the stone. So what I mean by that is that the act of burnishing is also part of pushing the metal closer to the stone. got a little tiny bit of wiggle, but it's nominal at this point. I'm not sure that without the magic epoxy, I'm going to get it to be much snugger. Because of the shape of this stone. Let me think about that. Maybe if I push a little more in from the side. Because what I'm feeling is it's trying to lift out vertically. It won't move front to back, but it does want to move. It wants to pull apart this way. I've still got a little wiggle in there. Where is my brass tool? That's going to be gentler on this.
Now, does the trick that you were talking about, does that include like metal pinching in the corner?
Yeah, the trick that I was trying to use on the corners is pinching the corner and then filing it down, because what it does is it compresses it around the shape of the corner. But this shape is not forgiving of that. I couldn't get in a close enough pinch to make it as snug as I wanted. So I had to do hand filing and then pushing down with the bezel pusher instead. So I'm seeing if I can get even more snug with this brass pusher, but I don't think I'm going to. Oh, maybe. No, it's still got that wiggle. I am going to say Mr. Cogswell, in his recommendation that he uses that little bit of epoxy, I am going to bow down before his years of experience and say, yes, this particular setting with this particular stone needs that drop of epoxy. This is not going to fall out, but if it had the epoxy, there'd be no movement. If I had this as an earring, I would have a tiny little clicking noise in my ear when I moved, and over time it could loosen up. So I'm not sure I can get that any snugger because of the angles of the stone. Because we've got a fairly snug wrap all the way around. Nope, this is just not going to get any snugger. Let me bring it over to the good camera. So it's a neat setting. I mean, there's a lot of potential to hang it off of the bottom of a necklace or something, but you can see that bit of wiggle that I'm getting, the lift that I can do.
Yeah.
That displeases me.
Yeah. Well, no one will notice it except you.
So they might. That's the problem. If I were wearing this as an earring and I were jumping around, I would hear the click from this little bit. I don't know if you guys can. Let me see if I can bring it closer to the microphone. I don't know if that. Yeah, you hear that click?
Yeah. Yes.
And if you hear a click, gang, over time, that little amount of movement in a setting can open back up the setting, because silver is soft enough that just that motion, think of it like the way that the ocean etches at stones and so on. That tiny amount of movement will over time open up your bezel. That's why you don't want any of that click. So I may see if I can open up a corner of this and add a little epoxy back in, just to give it that extra oomph that'll hold it in place so it doesn't wiggle on me. But a couple of comments on this one. I really like adding the decorative element to the walls. That's a neat addition to this. I think it's probably a little too subtle, especially because of how much I scraped it up, but I just used pattern sheet. Let me see if I can get it. Yeah, it's not going to show on here. I just used a textured pattern sheet for my walls, and it just adds a nice little bit to this. You need to not treat it as badly as I did in scraping it out of the piece of plastic. But it's a nice added element to the bottom of a larger pendant, or there's lots of uses I could see for this, or straight up, you've got a pair of earrings when you do this setting. The other thing to remember is that tongue is not a set of standard cuts. So some tongues are going to have a flat like mine do, which is what's making that wiggle room. It's that there's too narrow of a width. Some of them will be more cutting together to a more of a knife edge. That's a very fragile edge when you're setting something, so just be aware of it. And some of them are going to be more sort of marquee or even oval-ish in their shape. So tongue settings is not one of those ones that there's like an industry standard of X by Y size. And each one is going to be a little bit different for you. So play around with those. Neat ideas, some fun stuff to do with that. Questions? Somebody, I see a chat question. What is the discussion point? I'm not seeing what the sanding stuff is. Deborah, hang on a sec, my chat is now freezing on me. 3M sanding sheets, what is that in context of, Deborah? I mentioned sanding sheets. Yeah, what did I mention sanding sheets in the context of? I don't know what I was mentioning them in, so I'm blanking, I'm sorry. Sanding, was I finishing my settings? So I don't tend to spend the money on 3M because I use up sandpaper pretty harshly. Oh, finishing this piece. How would I finish this piece? No, because I probably would not sand it because it has the pattern on it. This, I would probably use that Swifty wheel that I talked about last time, my favorite thing ever. Swifty is a cutting wheel, but it's such a gentle one that as soon as you learn how to control them, you can really polish stuff up nicely. And so I would probably use one of these knife edge, or I'd better still, I hang on to them as they wear so that I have different cuts. So this started life as a knife edge, I think, and I just worn it down. And I would just use that very lightly and gently. And the reason I like it in particular is because it won't mar the stone. It'll do a little bit of cleanup of scratches and solder bits and so on, but it won't hurt the stone beneath it. And that includes opals, I believe. I have not had any markings up on my opal. My worst situation when I'm doing those is that it puts off a lot of the dust as it cuts up the wheel because it catches on the edge of the setting. But this would just be a straight up clean it up. And with the texture on it, I might try to blacken it to pull out the texture. But I like that we put a slightly curved cap on this one. You can play with, there's another one of these that I made that has more what I call the cowboy hat, because that was the original design that we got in the book. I like it trimmed away like this a little bit, so there's just a tiny lip, but play with the variations you can do on that one. Questions? Not a typical sanding sheet, but yeah, for the finishing, you're talking about the like micron level grits. When you get up past the 2000 grit, the sanding sheets really do become more polishing. I simply don't have the patience. I have a set of the high micron finishing sanding stuff. I don't go there. It's not my style. I don't have time for that. But if you like a really beautifully polished piece, that's the way to go. Work your way up. 400, 600, 800, 1,000, 1,200, 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, get all the way through and just then go to your polish after that and you'll get blingy material. Not worth doing if you've got textured metal down. Okay. Any other questions before we move on to another option?
Well, I was wondering if you did the tongue again,
Yep.
would you put just a little bit of an epoxy or something on the very bottom?
Yep.
Before you put the plastic around it and before you start to hammer it?
I probably wouldn't do it before I put the plastic around it because you need the plastic in place to position everything. And it'd be awkward to handle something with the wet glue in there. But I would probably have set it into the plastic a little lower than I did this time. I gave myself too much plastic in the way, put my glue in, put my stone down, let it set up overnight, and then gone back in and done the setting around it. At this point, I have the epoxy I like to use is different than John's. I don't like 2-part epoxies, but he's given us one and I bought some so that we could try it. I will use it on another setting at some point. I don't know if I have any of the settings that I'll use it on, but oh yeah, I'll probably use it when we do the briolette / teardrop setting. But I use it's orange and white packaging, and it is called a GS Hypo Cement, which you can get in any kind of hardware store at all. Comes in a bright orange box, and I use this for my pearls. I use it, I was taught to use it at the end of pearl stringing as well. And it's one that doesn't discolor radically. If you want something that is used by museums to do repairs on stones and so on, it's Hyxtal, Hyxtal. And that is a 2-parter. And that works, it'll attach anything to anything. It's a little scary. And so museums that are doing curatorial work and repairs on antique jewelry, if there's a cracked stone or something, they'll use Hyxtal in that setting. But John gave us, what did he give us? The something 3000, I think, in the book is what he likes to use. So we'll try some variations on that theme for other settings.
Okay.
Anything
thank
else
you.
on the questions? Okay, let's do our next one, and then we will stop and work on our tweezers mod, because I'm very excited for that, and that will rock your world if you're struggling with prong settings in particular. So, oops, wrong camera. This one is what I want. All right, so we're going in for the bullet. And so obviously we have to do one side and then the other. And we want to make sure again that we don't have any of our plastic material getting in the way. On this setting, I have jump rings on either side so that I can hang things from it and hang it from something. And my bullet's going to set in there pretty solidly. A bullet setting is one of those ones that, again, the curvature of the stone may be sturdier higher up or lower down. If it's a very steep curve like the tongue, you may want some of that epoxy in there. This has a fairly decent curve, I think, so I'm going to try no epoxy on this one. And I'm going to see if I can do this by hand to start. So this goes right into our north, south, east, west basics. And a fair amount of force. And you want to remember, I found myself doing this even though I shouldn't. Remember, you want to avoid chicken wing, which is, I'm going to show myself on camera doing chicken wing. When I'm pushing in, I'm trying to, not wrong camera. There we go. When I'm pushing in, I'm trying very hard to keep my elbow tucked in to my chest and not do this. As soon as you do this, it's more likely that you're going to go sliding across your stone and scrape. If you can keep tucked in and use your other hand for support and control, your movements are going to be much more focused than as soon as I do this, right? So give yourself that extra control as you push. It's awkward because our hand, we usually, especially if you're like me and you talk with your hands a lot, you want to move everything around. But by keeping it tucked in, you're giving yourself just that much more control over the push that you're doing. Now I've given myself a bit of a tricky set here because of how I positioned the jump rings, which makes it hard to get enough of an in and up. So I'm getting stuck doing a little bit more up than I would want to as a right out of the gate. So I'm having to do a little bit of maneuvering, but it's still generally the same principle of I'm trying to get down as close to the base as I can and push in and up. Got to tighten this down a little bit more. I made this more awkward for myself than I needed to. And I could absolutely pull out the hammer handpiece and do this. I just want to, not everybody's going to have access to a hammer handpiece. So more of these that I can do by hand, the better. Where did I put my little chuck? There we go. So in and up. Oops, opposite sides. In and up. And once I've got my north, south, east, west in fairly good shape, a little bit more north, south, then I can start to work the lumps just like I would on any other cabochon. So work a lump, push the opposite side. Work a lump, push the opposite side. And the graver ball definitely makes this easier to get your flipping back and forth. I found it took me all of about 30 seconds to fall in love with that. And I look forward to at some point taking a class where I can really learn how to use one, because I've never had a class in which I was taught the benefits of the graver ball. I know conceptually what they are. But I've never taken an engraving class. That's on my to-do list eventually. And none of the stone setting classes that I've taken had them available to me. So I'm hoping to take something more full scale in the stone setting department myself. Might go to the New Approach School in Tennessee if I can get the time. I hear their program is really wonderful. Blaine Lewis and the other folks that he brings in. But it's just not one of those tools that you see in a lot of small shops. It's only, it's part of it is probably because in the bench jewelry industry, stone setting is a completely separate training program from making the jewelry. So a lot of times in, the formal wedding jewelry and so on world, you're trained either as a jeweler or as a stone setter, but not as both. And so most of my upbringing was on the jewelry side. And I think it's a shame. I understand where it comes from in the history and of jewelry and the trades, is there's only so much you can become expert in the time we have. But I feel like it's a missed opportunity if you can't get more experience with stone setting when you're designing. I think designers really benefit from understanding things about how a stone will actually set or look, and you'll change your design. You'll widen your design expression the more you know about setting.
It's actually really common, isn't it? I mean, when you think of a designer like an architect who designs but doesn't build,
Yep.
then you have the contractor who has to figure it out,
Yep.
and then
Engineers that have to sign off on the building strengths and materials and stuff. Yeah, there's a lot, you're right. There's a lot of industries where there is that kind of separation. But hopefully, schools that are teaching those arts are giving at least the basics, like don't go and design a building without at least having laid hands on materials and used a saw for something and built something small. Build your home shed before you go building sky rises, so you understand what the hands that are going to be implementing your work are needing to do.
totally, yes. There's a lack right there. It's not like sinking.
Yep.
I mean, the more you know, hands-on, get your
Yep.
hands dirty and get involved. Design.
That said, I have never studied stone cutting because it's for me, stone cutting is sort of the line. Like stone setting, I'm good with. Stone cutting for me is one of those things that I say, I'm never going to spend the time to become good enough at it to like the work I've done. Now, maybe I could get good enough to do some cabs that I liked, but I would never, I just know that my life and the things I've already committed to, I'm not going to become a brilliant faceted stone cutter because the jewelry making is where my emphasis is. Should I probably take a class to understand it better? You betcha. But I'm not going to go out of my way and buy all the lapidary tools, I say, being the one who buys new tools every time I learn something.
Oh, yeah.
Rachel, thank you so much for adjusting your head position. That's great.
So this
No.
is good. You guys can see this well?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm always afraid I'm leaning into the picture. So some of that is about being on the right height stool so that I'm not tipping over. This is starting to get very, very stiff. So what I'm discovering, gang, is that the bullet behaves like a cross between the standard cabochon and the bullet we just set, and then the, I can't remember the names of these, conicals. In that it's got a steeper curve, but not quite as steep as this. Like this would be easier to set if I had serrated it the way that we did on our on these conicals, because I'm really struggling to get some of the last of the setting in. There's so much compression that I need to do. And yet at the same time, it still has a feel of a traditional lower cut bezel because it has enough curve that you can see where it's headed. So it's a bit of a battle. And I think I might beat this battle more with the hammer handpiece, which is what I would immediately be going to were I doing this for my own work, but I'm trying to give you guys the hands-on tools as well. Get a little bit more viciously in there. I'm loving having it in the plastic though, because this is such a small setting that I'm not sure I'd get any angle on it at all if I were trying to hold it another way. Now, what that means when we get to flipping it over to do the other stone is I have to make a little pocket so that the stone doesn't, on this side, doesn't get pushed in and pressurized and broken at the tip. Oh, this is a lot of work on this one. Don't need any upper body work at the gym. Not that I was going to go to the gym tonight anyhow. So I'm using a lot of counter force. I don't know if you guys can see how strongly I'm having to grip this to push back against the amount of force I'm putting on it. And we're getting some action on here. I'm going to take this out and see if I can possibly get a little of the plastic out of the way. Is that going to help? Yeah, getting the plastic out of the way. I need to get a little bit lower down on this setting because here I can get a good position, but when I get into these other corners, I can't. So let me get that water boiling again. If I may need to go grab some more water. Give me 30 seconds, gang. I got to refill the hot water pot and I will be right back. Okay, so while that is boiling, I am going to suggest that we talk about this mod that we're going to be doing to the tweezers. So, if you have worked on prong settings before, like me, you may find that the challenge is to keep all the parts together while you're getting them set up for soldering. This magical pair of tweezers is designed to help with that. So what we're starting with, where's my one that I'm about to mod? Down here. Oh, I was using it earlier. Let's let's see. All right. So this started life as this longer pear. And the first thing I did was I trimmed it back a ways. You may find, you can also buy blunter tips, but you want enough material that you can really work inside of them. And then what we're doing is we're putting a line following the line of the tweezer in one side of it. And then we're putting one or more lines across in the other side of the tweezer. So let me highlight those just so you can really see them pop on camera. Oops, not with that pen, I won't. So there and there. Is that showing up for you guys where the pink is? And then we're running a line down the vertical. So the act of doing that gives us positions that pinch the wire that is going up the prong on the side that runs this way, and lets us slot our rings that we're going to be soldering to it into the other half, so they stay positioned near each other. Okay, and by doing that, and we'll probably want one that's little itty bitty, and we'll want one that's further down depending on what we're working on, but by doing that we leave ourselves well held in place when it's time to solder the rings on. And John's technique is that we're going to use a U so that this is holding and then this is what we're soldering. This is post cutoff of the U. So these two prongs, or these two prongs, depending on how you're working it, probably on an oval, I would go diagonally. So these two prongs are a U of material, and we're holding one side of the U in place. Ooh, got to turn it the right way in the tweezers though. We're holding one solidly in place. The other U is resting up on the diagonal opposite it. And then we can touch down our small amounts of solder just where we need them to go. That alone is going to save you from flinging your pieces across the room in frustration, because it's going to give you the stability that you get from this action is huge. Is that visible enough, or do I need to draw that bigger scale so you guys can see it better?
Yeah, I'm a little
Okay.
confused.
So if we were to open our tweezers up wide, like a little bird, right? So our tweezers are connecting here. One side gets that cut and the other side gets that. Oops, hang on, my water's boiling on me. Let me get that moving. Okay, let me finish this drawing and then we'll ease up on that other setting. So by doing this, if we're looking side on at this piece, it's the tweezer edge has a little cutout like that runs the width of it. Right? And this one has a cutout running as a channel down the middle of it. So that when we rest material, our rings of metal that are making up the base of the prongs sit snugly in there, and our uprights of the actual prongs themselves tuck themselves into the wire. And what that does is it means that the connection where these two meet is a nice locked in place hold position. If you try to hold it in other things, you'll see that people go to great lengths to hold their prongs together, like plastering them into place and so on. This way you can just clip and solder, clip and solder. And that'll make a lot more sense once we start doing that work. So before I reposition this one, let's talk about how we mod these. Step one is if they're long, you're gonna blunt them off by about that much. You wanna get to where there's a width of material that you will have enough meat to put the long wire of whatever wire gauge you're likely to use a lot of.
Rachel, what tool do you use to saw those off or cut them off?
I use a traditional handsaw, and we're going to do one on camera today. So that's been planned into my schedule.
Okay, great.
So
Okay.
yeah, so this is, I mean, you're going to use a crappy heavy gauge blade, but you're still going to use, or you could use something like, what's the wood saws that look like heavy duty versions of our jeweler's saws. Coping
Hacksaws.
saw. What is it? Hacksaw, yeah. You could, it's going to be a little mucky. I will say, make sure your tweezers are steel. If you try to do this mod to titanium tweezers, you're just going to snap them. Because we have to force the jaws open enough to be able to do some bend work to them and then reposition them back where they were. And you don't want to really fight with softening up tweezers like this. So I'm going to go, I do think I have 8 gauge. I do have 8. I have 8 blades, not 8/0, but actual like super heavy. And I'm going to pop one of those in. And I promise we will go back after this to the setting that I just got the hot water for. But this is a nice, exciting change of pace that you guys can work on before we really get into section 3. The first 2 settings in, chapter 4. The first 2 settings in chapter 4 do not need this, but you will want to have it by the time we get to the 3rd setting in chapter 4. Same old with steel. You just want to make sure that you're not getting it into your regular materials. So I tend to work off my block, like I don't pull out my bench drawer or anything so that I'm not getting it mixed in with everything else. And then I'll run a magnet around the floor and grab it. So I'm just going to cut off a chunk to get it back towards, probably a little bit more than that on these. These are fairly thin. It's going to take a moment to get it to catch. There goes one blade. Tighten it down well enough. I may not actually need quite such a thick blade. This one is fighting a little bit, so I'm going to step down. I'll step down to a 6 if I have one. I do have a 6. Come on, there's my blade. I have a 5. I don't have a 6, so we'll see if that's good enough. It'll just take a little longer. Keep forgetting that I won one of the Green Lion hammers, so I've got to start playing around with and see how I like it. Won a prize drawing, but I haven't had a chance to slow down and unpack it. Ah. All right, apparently I'm using too much force this afternoon.
Blame it on a
Michael's
bad
class.
batch.
Sorry? Oh, no, I'm sure it's the user and not the,
I always blame it on a bad batch if I'm breaking blades.
there are sawing days and there are soldering days and there are hammering days is my take on it. And some days you just got to switch to hammering. In the Michael Good class, we worked in bronze, which was the first time I'd done any consequential work with bronze that wasn't casting. It was really nice to work with. I hate working with brass, but bronze is much closer to silver behaviors. Okay, at this point, I'm snapping them off because I'm close enough that I can probably do that. Yep, there we go. That's one. That's
So is that about an
Pardon?
inch and a half or two? Is that about an
So
inch
it's
and a
gonna,
half?
the real answer is it's gonna depend on the width of the piece of the pear that you get, because this is narrower than most of the tweezers that I've had in the past. So what I'm looking for is a little wider, probably twice as wide as the gauge of metal that I'm most likely to use on my prongs. Because what I need is a channel running down the middle of it and a little support on either side.
Looks like it's gonna be a fabulous trick. Maybe you should sell them.
You can see how much effort it's taking me to make them. Somebody else can make them. Somebody else. I will pay somebody else to make these. But
then sell
honestly, if you have the tweezers, I would make 2 pairs of these, because then you can hold more complicated things. So, okay, I've made them stubby. I'm gonna get rid of some of that extra garbage from the steel. And then I'm gonna use a junky file to clean these up. So I'm just going to blunt the ends a little bit so that they're not going to bite me when I'm working with them. Some basic smoothing out. So I'm taking off the sharp corners and I'm taking off the tips a little bit to blunt them down. They should be sort of snub-nosed by the time they're done. And if you want, you can even take them a step further and go put them on your cutting compound on your polishing wheel. But these are pretty clean as is. Okay, so I've now got my stubbies, my little stubby pliers, but I still have enough length that I'm going to be able to get things in there. And then I'm going to go grab something that I can use to stuff inside of it to keep them open more than they would be. So I'm stuffing, in this case, just a piece of wood dowel in there to hold them open, because I don't want them snapping back as I'm working. And I'm going to mark out a center line on one side so that I know where I'm cutting and or sawing and filing rather, or filing in this case. And I just want a nice clean down the middle. Where's my Sharpie that I like for this? Just clean line down the middle, and it doesn't have to go as far down as I tend to do. Like, you really only need, unless you're making ginormous prong set bezels, you don't need more than a 3/4 of an inch or something. And then on the other side, you're going to put a couple of perpendicular lines, 2 or 3, and sort of space them apart. Think of these as the heights that you might put a ring on your prong set. Right, so we got a couple spots there. Line there. And this one, this direction is the easy one. This one you can start with a saw, or you can start with a triangle file. I tend to want to put a guideline in with my saw. Right, and then I'm going to go to my triangle files, small triangle files. And I'm going to deepen that line probably a third of the way down. We don't need to go terribly far, but keep those things apart. Otherwise, they're going to snap at you when you let go. And really, really try to keep this perpendicular. It's very important that it not be catty corner. If you can, try turning it around, and because we all file a little unevenly, try and file it from the other direction too. Straighten up your lines if they're going a little wonky. And then we're going to come back through with a round file, because our goal is to make the round or half round of our prong sets seat nicely in here. So I can get a better grip. Better file. And again, you don't need much. We're not even going to end up halfway through the material. It's just enough that there's a toe pick, like a catch point for the bit of metal that's being held. It's a little guide that we want in place for the portion of the prong, or portion of the setting that fits in there.
So would you use like the actual prong size, like, and put it in there to see if it's gonna fit?
You can, yeah. I mean, so I don't make one for each size of wire that I'm working with. I find what's my norm, because really, if you think about it, on a curved piece of metal, it's going to hold. It's just going to be deeper or less deep into the curve. So we really just need the starter point. I just wouldn't make it so, I wouldn't go tiny, tiny. I'd probably think of like at least 18 gauge prongs, or whatever John says he uses most often, which I'm not at that point in the book right now, or I'd look it up, but a good basic weight is where you're aiming for. And yeah, see if the wire sits nicely in it. Okay, so I've got side one, which in and of itself is going to grab on any of those lines. I don't know if it's too subtle for you guys to see the gouge in there, but I've got 3 cut points on the line. Now I'm going to go and do the harder one, which at this one, and this is why you want the steel pliers, you kind of have to bend your pliers out of the way. Bend your tweezers out of the way. So hoping these are steel, because otherwise I'm going to snap them. Do it gently. These may not be steel, so I may not want to do that. I'm going to have to just sort of fudge it, because what I can't do is get the saw in there to make my starting line. So I may just have to work exclusively with the files. Where's my triangle file again? There we go. Yeah, this one is feeling like it doesn't want to be bent and that it would snap. So I'm just going to go in, start my line very slowly and carefully. In the book, John talks about bending them a lot, but I snapped too many going and doing that early on. So I'm a little more cautious about it if it feels like it doesn't have any give. It's going to depend on how hardened the metal of your tweezers is. And you could potentially do this to an old pair that are dying, which you'll have probably annealed fairly well by now. Because all this really is doing is acting as a grip. It doesn't have to have a whole lot of strength to its cross lock. It's just got to have enough to hold things in position.
Are you using the triangle or what file?
Yep. Yeah, I'm starting with a triangle because I couldn't get in there to cut. I mean, I'd either be going saw to triangle to circle to round, or I'd just, in this case, because I couldn't get the angle, I'm starting with the triangle. Because what it does is gives me the opportunity to create a straight channel to start with. If you have far superior cutting wheel management of your Fordham than I do, you could potentially get in here and do that with the flex shaft. I just don't have the dexterity. And part of the reason I go a little long on this is because it is hard to get a deep channel in there. So if I don't get as deep a channel towards the back, that's okay. I just want to have enough material gouged out to hold it up at the front. Let's see if my bigger round file will do me in good stead here. And John has, there's a page in the book, I think it's, what is it, 90 something or 60 something, about 4 or 5 pages into chapter 4. He has the drawings that go with this and the step-by-step, if you want to look that over as you're doing it. Okay, so I now have, let me bring this over to the super camera. There we go. I now have this groove vertically. See? And then I have in this case, I chose to do 3 different ones horizontally on the other side. And what this will do in gripping, get my prong setting back. Where did I put that little prong setting down? Doo-doo-doo. Okay, mystery prong setting disappearing. Where did it go? All right, I'm going to grab another prong setting. Hang on a sec. All right, so we have our vertical lines on a prong setting, and we have our horizontal lines on the prong setting. And our goal is, of course, that we want the curve to be fitting on those horizontals.
You're off
And
camera.
then, oh, thank you. So the curve just fits into what we've cut vertically, horizontally rather. And then the uprights fit into that channel. And you'll feel when you've done this deep enough and you go to grip a setting like this, you will feel it. It'll feel like it's exactly in place. Like there's no movement of the, like I can go, whoop, da, 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 da. It's not going to come moving around on me because I've got the channels that this wire is fitting into and that this wire is fitting into. And that combined, because we're with the fact that we're going to work we're going to have a little piece of wire that runs over here, and it's going to be a nice tight fit.
Bring it down, Rachel.
Oh, thank you. We're gonna have a little U of material when we're putting our wires together. It's going to create a situation where just by holding this firmly, it holds the opposite side in place. So then we go in, we got our torch in there. John, of course, does this with his like 17 hands at once. So he's holding the torch and the tweezers and the everything all in his hands. You pick up a tiny bit of solder and you get to put it right where you want it on that opposite side from what you're gripping. So this alone gives you the control to immediately do this without having to set it all up in plaster or in wolf clay or any of the many other things that are out there. If you can master using this to hold things when you're doing prong setting, it's going to speed you up and it's going to give you focus because you're holding things relative to where you're working. Whereas if it's in clay, you're sort of working down on the project. So this gives us the combined, our hands are participating together to position this, and I can turn and move and touch down where I need to with my solder. Questions?
I'm a little blank because that prong is made already.
Yes,
So-
it is. I'm showing you because I don't have parts put together for one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah,
you're
absolutely.
you're taking the one part, you're adding the second part, the prong, and then the circle, and then you're gonna put the solder while you're holding it or something.
Yeah, when we make one of these ourselves, which we'll do in a few sessions, we're gonna make these rings and we're gonna make the uprights, but they're gonna be on a giant U. We're making two sides at once. So we're gonna have the U shape, right? And then the rings get set between the U, and the U, one side of the U is held into our upright cut, and one part of the ring that we've made is held in our horizontal. So it's just holding the material. It's giving it a little lock to say that's exactly where I want it positioned, and then I'm working on the opposite side for soldering. This, I promise you, as soon as you cut one of these and put some parts into it, you will go, oh, that's what she meant about locking it in place. It really is kind of magical when it happens. Questions
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah, when you said the actual line in the middle,
The,
I thought you were gonna literally go through it, and I was thinking, whoa.
oh, no. It's a channel. We're making a channel.
Channel
That
okay.
is just sort of acting as a stopper, because as soon as we get into that little notch, it's not going to slide. Like what I used to fight with when I was making those is I'd make my U, it'd be nice and firm. As soon as the heat hits it, it wants to start sliding out of position, right? But by having this thing that is gripping it one way vertically so it can't move up, down, and one way horizontally, I'm doing my motions backwards, but you know what I mean. One is locked this direction and one is locked this direction. It holds it. It can't move, making it harder for the one I'm soldering to move. Not impossible. It can still distort, and we'll see that and talk about how to fix it. But the fact that we've got this side locked in while we're soldering the other side gives us so much more control over prong setting. Like, this was total game changer for me when John showed us this. So, and we're hitting 7 o'clock, and I think probably trying to get the rest of this done tonight is impractical. So I think what I'll do is I'll reposition it off camera into the plastic a little better and finish that up as one of our next session options. So we did a little setting, we did a little tool making, we looked at a few tools that are not necessarily as traditionally used for our setting. And we have plans for next session, which include, we're going to do a couple more of the settings from this chapter. So we'll finish up the ones we've started. And there's still, I needed to ask your opinions, gang, about how to position things so I can be ready for these other two settings. So the two that are really challenging me on how to position them are these. And which materials I use. Let's start with this one. So this is the reverse setting with cap that we did towards the end of the chapter. And so we need to be able to get our material from the reverse over the cap. I need to be able to push here and here, you know, I need to be setting this as if it were the bezel, but the stone is hanging down. So I'm trying to figure out, I might be able to put it into the plastic and give a little extra room, but I'm afraid it's going to wiggle. I'm trying to figure out whether I can do it upside down. I don't think I'll get the access that I need. Anybody have opinions, ideas?
Is it a part? Is it a part?
It's-
Like, it's two parts.
It's two parts, yeah. So this is
Okay.
the conical
Yeah.
dome
yeah.
that we're setting from behind. And then what we have to do to close it in is take the domed cap and push down the material around it as if the domed cap were just a cabochon. But the problem is we've got all that stone sticking out. So I think the best thing I've come up with is to maybe put it in the plastic, but make a little like air pocket for the stone below. Anybody have better ideas for me?
Wouldn't you just like encase the stone with the plastic and
So the-
stabilize it?
I'm worried that if I fully encase a stone, if I put too much downward pressure to set the thing, that just like the same reason that we put a round burr hole, you know, that we dug out with the round burr in our corners of setting something, just like that, if I put too much downward pressure on the point, it's going to chip the point. Even though it's plastic, there's no place for it to go, which is why I came up with the idea of a little air pocket equivalent to what we drill out with a burr on the
Mhm.
metal.
Well,
Any-
yeah, probably go with that, and then
Yeah.
maybe just, can you epoxy the bottom part?
Oh, you know, I never think to epoxy and on the assumption that I'm going to remove it. You might have a great idea there to epoxy the stone into place
Yeah.
Right.
and then set on top of it, and then I can clean the epoxy away. That's brilliant. Okay, thank you. That was the missing piece on that, and that may also be the missing piece on the other one. This one is challenging. This is the one where we're going to grind a little channel there and put a wire around and set it around the wire. But because I needed a cap on it, that's what I'm worried about, is breaking that. I think it may be just the reverse of what I just did, just leaving room for the point. So maybe you answered both my questions. I need to do the epoxy thing, which is just
Yeah.
something that I'm loath to do, but other ideas?
I mean, that's what I did with my earrings. I just epoxied it.
I got taught early that you only use glue on pearls, and it just stuck with me. So John's got to make me think more radically, is what it comes down to. Yeah, I will try that and try to get those set up so that I can set them on screen next time. And then we will also start chapter 4 based on what you guys gave me for feedback in the Facebook group. And chapter 4 is prong settings, although it starts with crown settings, which are technically a kind of prong. Oh, I'm waving my hands at you guys again. So the crown settings are the ones that we make basically out of a tapered tube. They don't have to be tapered, but they look more elegant when they are. And they're one of those ones that you can do a lot of playing around with. Like you can build the base of it and build something as a separate segment that has a reverse cut to all the cutaways you've done on the crown. And then you flip it over and solder it back on, and it gets these elegant like castellations to it. It's a very classical and elegant setting. And it's more durable than a lot of prong settings because it's made out of heavier starting metal. So what we're doing on that is taking away material in order to create the prongs. Whereas later in the chapter, we then go on to a variety of shapes of the manufactured settings, like, you know, the actual, what I think of as when I think of prong settings, which is like what I was showing, basket settings, basically. And basket settings, we just like when we did the series of cabochon settings in different shapes, for basket settings, I'm going to be running through the variety of shapes as well. Thankfully, there are not quite as many variations in chapter 4 as there were in chapter 3, because we don't have all the combos, but there are 2 different ways to make the crown, and then only one way, I think, I have to refresh myself, to make the basket settings, except that there are versions of it that you do for fewer or more prongs. And there's versions where we branch off into a combination of a prong and a sort of semi-framed kind of thing. I really like what John writes up in the book about how he sets pair settings with a combo of sheet metal at the front for the prongs and wire prongs at the back. It's very elegant. And so we'll go into all those variations over the next few sessions, next however many sessions it takes. But in this route, what I'll do is intersperse the rest of our physical setting of stones from chapter 3, and then we'll start interspersing the settings from 4 so that we're not all piled up at the end of chapter 4 like we were this time. So it seems like that's going to be a healthier approach. We won't forget what we did in building the setting before we get to the actual activity. What else we got? I don't think we have any other tools to mod for that.
Where can I watch the videos I missed?
Great question. Thank you for that leeway, that lead in. I am going to give you a bunch of links in the chat, one of which is the YouTube. Oop, did I copy them? I didn't copy them. Copy and then paste. You guys can also sign up for my mailing list. The very first link that I give you in that pile is the page of other links, which tells you all the things. There you can sign up for my mailing list so you know what shows I'm doing and what classes I'm teaching. And then there's also the YouTube recordings. You can sign up for the channel and you'll get notices when new ones come out. Or you can just check it frequently. I know I don't like to sign up for a whole lot on YouTube myself. Remember that we have the General Projects Facebook group. If you haven't joined that and you're on Facebook, it has the guides is where you want to start, which gives you what I think I'm going to be covering in each chapter already broken out. And there's some documents in there that are helpful for projects. There's also links to suppliers for various things. That includes stuff that people have suggested on our various calls. You can follow me on Instagram, where you will get random pictures of what I'm working on at any given point in time, as time permits, or you might see my cat or some blueberry pie that I've made. Depends on my mood. It's a very casual Instagram. Anybody got anything to show me that I can see and ooh and ah over? Because we've been away from each other for a month. No? Nobody?
I made a bunch of stuff, but
Yeah.
I'm not quite finished, but I did make some rings that
Nice.
I'm trying to think in terms of using the skills that I'm learning and then making more than one, because if I mess one up,
Yep.
then I got the second one. So, and I spend way too much time on those engravers. I mean, like almost
On setting them up and getting them, so you did your
get
hand.
it right.
Yeah.
Just to get it right.
I will tell you, I am not the gal to teach you how to do that better. I'm going to teach you as much as I can on it, but man, graver sharpening is not my thing. Literally every class that I had with John, I was like, John, I need you to remind me how to do this. And I would get it and I would do it for 15 minutes and then I'd lose it. So practice, practice. Yeah.
But I know that was part of the chapter. So, and I bought them. So I wanted to make sure that I had them done when I was going to use them. So
Nice.
I focused on that. I got tools. I got the setters for the stone setting. I just got my hammer piece today.
Nice.
And then these are the rings that I finished.
Cool. Can you show one of them closer up? Because it looks like you did some detailing around them. Cool. So are you cutting out the back plates and doing what's the order of operations you're doing on those? Because you've got a nice ripply around it.
Yeah, it was flat. I wanted it to kind of look like a flower in a way.
It looks great. Yep.
And I tried to use 2 different bottom,
Bands.
the same kind of stone,
Yeah,
but different bands.
nice.
And I didn't melt it.
That's the important part.
Nice.
Does look great.
That's
And-
the best part.
So it's, yeah, I made those.
So one thing I will say is that is a beautiful use of a simple modification to dimension. And this was one of the things I had to learn in order to evolve to my next level of shows that I wanted to get into. Changing dimensionality instead of just working flat rocks your world. That's why I like hollow forms. That's why I like structural forms. That tiny little bit of change you made around the flower, you could have done it flat. It would not have been nearly as interesting as the result you got. So great minor tweak to a design that makes a huge difference. Cool.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to show anything?
Did you enjoy Michael Good's workshop? What did you
I
make?
love-
I was interested.
Yes. So Michael is a definite character, that's for sure. So we got into some weird little rambling things philosophically that were a little hard to follow, but man, he knows how to make metal change shape. And it was a long class, and we just did 6 different designs, I think, in the 5 days, which was more than enough to keep us busy. So what I was taking from him was his anti-classing. If you don't know Michael Good's work, it's
Yeah,
worth
no, I'm
looking at.
familiar. Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. And up in person, it's even more beautiful. And it's a lot harder than it looks, and it needs the right tools. That's the big thing that we learned is, you can have some of the tools, you're only going to get some of the results if you don't have really the set of tools. But I adored it. You've taken his class before?
Yeah, I took it in Colorado when he came there.
Nice. He is teaching in Connecticut in another month or so. So if anybody's looking to take his class, I can absolutely say I would recommend it. It's intense. It's very intense, and it's lots and lots of tippy tappy hammering. But it's very cool. I'll try to remember to bring my samples down from it. I literally haven't finished unpacking from being up in Connecticut, in Massachusetts for the last couple weeks. So I'm still playing catch up. Anybody else have a show off? Show and tell? Pardon? Okay. Well, gang, it's good to see you again. It felt like a very long month without having this. And our next date is, what is it? Drum roll, please. Our next date is the 20th, I believe. And if you are not signed up for both sections, those of you that are new, make sure that you registered for both the first and the third Wednesdays, because it's a different link to get in to the first of the month versus the third of the month. So enjoy. And I
Thank you.
again.
Thank you,
Thank
Rachel.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.